I arrived in late autumn, when the leaves had already turned to rust, and the sky seemed to hang lower over the hills of Pennsylvania. The old hotel stood at the edge of town, tucked behind fog-choked trees and long forgotten by time. A relic from the early 1900s, it was once a grand stopover for train passengers and traveling businessmen. Now, it mostly served as a budget option for passing truckers and the occasional ghost hunter. I wasn't looking for ghosts when I took the job, just something quiet, temporary, something far away from the noise of the city and everything I had tried to leave behind. The manager, a gray-haired man named Mr. Cotter, had offered me room and board in exchange for helping out around the place, check-ins, light cleaning, manning the desk at night. It was on my second evening that I noticed it. Room 204. The hallway on the second floor was long and narrow, with threadbare carpet and wallpaper that peeled in floral curls. Most of the doors were numbered with old brass plaques, but room 204 had no plaque. No number. Just a faint outline where the plaque had once been. The door was different, too, painted a slightly darker shade than the others, as if someone had tried to cover something up and failed. I asked Mr. Cotter about it during lunch. He didn't look up from his newspaper. "We don't use that room," he said flatly. "Why not?" He hesitated just long enough for it to matter. Then, without looking at me, he folded the paper and said, "It's sealed. Has been since the 50s. Doesn't open." "But it has a keyhole." He looked at me, his eyes flat and cold. "It doesn't open." That night I dreamed of a woman crying. Not loudly, but softly, like someone trying to hide her grief. The sound echoed down the hallway and into my room, even though I knew no one else was staying on the second floor. When I sat up in bed, heart pounding, I could still hear her, somewhere behind the walls. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I wandered the hotel on my own. The second floor creaked under my feet, every step heavy with silence. When I passed room 204 again, I noticed something else. An old scratch across the door frame, like someone had once tried to claw their way out. I pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. Then, faintly, a breath. A whisper. "Help me." I stumbled back, heart racing, but when I looked again, the hallway was still. Empty. No one behind me, no one ahead. I told myself it was the wind. That evening, while sorting old records in the front desk drawer, I found a ledger dated 1952. Each line was written in tight cursive, listing guests and room numbers. Room 204 had one entry. Eleanor C. She had checked in on October 13th, 1952. There was no checkout date. I had only arrived at the hotel that afternoon, with the skies over Maryland still heavy with the remnants of summer rain. The Cape Wexler Inn stood like a faded echo of the 1950s. Pastel tiles chipped at the corners, brass fixtures dulled to bronze. Room 204 was mine for the week, a corner suite overlooking the parking lot and, if you leaned far enough out the window, the distant water of Chesapeake Bay. But the real view was inside. Timeless wallpaper yellowed with age, a rotary phone that hadn't rung in decades, and the faintest scent of lavender buried deep in the walls. I wasn't there for comfort. I was there for the story. As a journalist chasing whispers of the paranormal, I'd spent my career chasing half-truths and campfire tales. But this was different. The story of Margaret Hale had lingered here like a stain, unfaded, unforgotten. She'd disappeared in 1952 after checking into room 204. She was never seen again. No body, no note, just vanished. The maid said her belongings remained untouched and the bed had not been slept in. 1 hour she was reading in the lounge downstairs, then nothing. And yet, nearly every guest since then who stayed in room 204 reported the same thing. Footsteps in the hallway, a cold presence, the distinct rustle of a crinoline skirt, and, most chilling of all, someone sitting at the foot of the bed just after midnight. That night, I decided to test the legend myself. The room felt normal enough at first. I unpacked my audio recorder, placed a camera on the dresser, and checked the batteries twice. I made notes in my journal. The old radiator hissed quietly in the corner, and the overhead light buzzed with a tired filament hum. Everything felt still. Until 11:43 p.m. That was when the atmosphere in the room changed. It wasn't sudden, it crept in like a fog. The temperature dropped noticeably. My breath wasn't quite visible, but I could feel it, sharp against my lips. The floral wallpaper seemed to darken in color, like old bruises blooming through paint. I sat up in bed, listening. Nothing but the radiator. And then, 3 slow knocks. Not on the door, on the inside wall. The one between room 204 and the maintenance closet. I froze. It was deliberate, not the echo of old pipes or shifting boards. 3, spaced evenly. Measured. Intentional. I checked the hallway. Empty. Back in the room, I turned off the light and lay back down, eyes open to the shadows overhead. My recorder ticked away on the bedside table. 11:58 p.m. And then, exactly at 12:03 a.m., I felt it. The pressure. Not weight, exactly, but the sensation that someone had joined me. The far end of the mattress dipped as if someone was sitting there. My body went rigid. I could hear the springs under the bed creak softly. I didn't dare turn my head. The air smelled faintly like violets. I reached out for the voice recorder and whispered, "Is someone there?" Silence. But when I played back the audio the next morning, just after my own whisper, another voice came through. Very faint. Female. Still waiting. 2 words. Crisp, soft, clear. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I turned the light on, paced the floor, even opened the window for air. But the energy had shifted. Something was watching me now. Something that had waited decades for someone to truly listen. I left the room just after dawn, but not before checking the footage. The camera had remained aimed toward the mirror opposite the bed all night. I scrubbed through the timestamp from midnight. Nothing. But at 12:03 a.m., just as I had felt the pressure on the mattress, the mirror shimmered faintly. It was almost imperceptible, but there, a distortion like breath on glass. And then, for less than a second, a pale hand. Slender, with painted nails, pressed against the inside of the mirror. I stopped the footage and stared. My own reflection had been asleep. No one else was in the room, and yet that hand, it wasn't mine. I spoke with the hotel manager later that day. A tired woman in her 60s named Mrs. Caldwell who had worked there since she was a teenager. She didn't laugh, didn't act surprised. Instead, she nodded solemnly and said, "Room 204 gets lonely this time of year." "What do you mean?" She looked away. "Margaret Hale disappeared on a rainy night, just like this week. They say she was waiting for someone who never showed. Some say she was pregnant. Others think she found out something dangerous, and tried to run. But that room has been hers ever since. And if she thinks you're listening, she won't let go." I asked if anyone had ever tried to get rid of the mirror. Her lips tightened. "They did. In '88. A reverend from out of state tried a cleansing. Mirror cracked during the ceremony. Just a hairline split. But the very next guest ended up in the hospital with unexplained burns on their legs. We had it restored. No one's tried since." Later that evening, I reviewed my notes and planned to move rooms. But something inside me hesitated. The story was here, unfinished, whispering from the mirror's edge. So I stayed another night. And the next visit from Margaret wasn't nearly so gentle. The following morning, I stood staring at room 204 from the hallway, arms crossed, my mind racing. I hadn't slept much. The sound of Eleanor's voice calling for someone in the night still echoed in my ears. It wasn't just a whisper. It was pleading, urgent, desperate. I took a breath and inserted the master key. The room was empty. Nothing had moved. The curtains remained drawn, the furniture untouched. The bed was still made from yesterday's housekeeping. I stepped inside cautiously, half expecting someone, to appear. But silence greeted me. Then, out of sheer instinct, I turned to the bathroom mirror. And that's when I saw him. A reflection, blurred, distant, of a man in an old-style bellhop uniform standing behind me. I spun around. No one. The room was empty. I stared at the mirror again. Empty. Just me now, and a faint line of fog trailing along the edges of the glass. But I could have sworn he was real. There was no mistaking the deep blue uniform, the red trim, or the glint of a brass nameplate, though I hadn't had time to read it. I backed out of room 204, closed the door behind me, and made my way downstairs to the front desk. Lorraine, the daytime manager, had just clocked in. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "I think I might have." Lorraine chuckled at first, until I explained what I'd seen. Her expression darkened. "You saw someone in uniform?" "Yes. In the mirror, behind me. He was watching." She leaned in, lowering her voice. "That would be Thomas." I blinked. "Thomas?" She nodded slowly. "Thomas Kelly. He worked here back in the early 1950s. Bellhop. Clean record. Quiet guy. But he was the last person seen with Eleanor." My breath caught. "What happened to him?" "That's the thing. The day she disappeared, March 8th, 1952, he vanished too. Clocked out at noon and never returned. Left his uniform behind. Some folks thought he ran. Others thought—" She trailed off. "Well, you know how people talk." A heavy silence settled between us. Lorraine reached under the counter and pulled out a slim black binder, something that looked old and well used. The incident log. I flipped through the pages. March 9th, 1952. Eleanor Stern, age 24. Guest in room 204, reported missing. Last seen exiting the elevator at 11:42 p.m. on March 8th. March 10th. Thomas Kelly bellhop did not report for morning shift. Personal items found undisturbed. Uniform folded neatly on bed. No note. No contact. 2 disappearances. Back to back. Both tied to room 204. The next page was blank. I closed the binder, my hands shaking slightly. What happened in that room? "No one knows for sure," Lorraine said. "But she never checked out, and he never came back." That evening, as the sun dipped below the lake's horizon, I returned to room 204 with a notepad, a flashlight, and a recorder. Not to be brave, not to be reckless, but to listen. I turned off the lights and sat near the dresser. The air grew still, then cold. At 11:42 p.m., almost as if on cue, the room came alive. It began with soft footsteps pacing above me. But there was no floor above room 204, only the roof. Then, the mirror. It clouded over, not with steam, but with something more unnatural. Words began to appear as if etched by a finger dragged across invisible condensation. 3 words. "I trusted him." I froze. The room temperature dropped 10 more degrees and I could see my breath. From the corner, the closet creaked open. Slowly. Deliberately. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it at the door. Inside, hanging on a lone wire hanger, was a dusty, moth-eaten bellhop uniform. I hadn't put it there. I hadn't seen it there earlier. But now, it hung in the closet like it had never left. I stepped back, heart hammering, when the doorknob behind me twisted. Someone, or something, was trying to come in. I rushed to the door, flung it open. The hallway was empty, but down at the far end, flickering beneath the dying light bulb near the emergency stairs, stood a woman. Dark dress, long, dark hair, pale skin. Eleanor. I called out, but she turned the corner and vanished. Gone. Back inside the room, the words on the mirror had changed. Room 204 remembers. I didn't sleep that night, but I stayed. The next morning, I met with Lorraine again and asked if the hotel had any archived blueprints, anything about the original layout. She nodded, curious, and after some digging, we uncovered an original 1948 blueprint tucked away in an old filing cabinet. And there it was. A maintenance corridor that used to connect room 204 to the bellhop's service room, sealed off in the 1960s. No longer in use, but it was still there, on the other side of the back wall behind the closet. Could someone get through now? I asked. Only if they knew where to look. That night, I removed the panel behind the closet. Dust, mold, spider webs, and then a hidden door. I pushed. It gave way with a groan, revealing a narrow passage choked with old pipes and cobwebs. My flashlight flickered, barely cutting through the dark. But I walked, one careful step at a time, heart racing in my throat. At the end of the corridor, I found a small room, a bench, an old key, a suitcase, and scratched into the wall over and over again. She was never supposed to die. I backed away slowly, and then I heard the cry, a woman's voice, whispering, crying, calling for help. Eleanor's voice. Still here, still waiting, still walking the halls of room 204. The morning after I discovered the hidden corridor, I sat alone in the hotel cafe, stirring coffee I had no desire to drink. The chill from room 204 hadn't left me. It clung to my skin, seeped into my bones. The words scratched into the walls echoed louder than any scream. She was never supposed to die. I couldn't shake the feeling that room 204 hadn't shown me everything. That there was more to Eleanor's story, something still buried beneath decades of silence. I opened my laptop and began digging deeper. Newspapers, archived police reports, missing persons databases. After hours of cross-referencing, I found it. An old article from March 15, 1952, Hotel Bellhop wanted for questioning in missing woman case. The article named Thomas Kelly as the last person seen with Eleanor Stern. But what caught my attention was the paragraph buried deep in the article. Witnesses claimed Eleanor was visibly distressed during her final days at the hotel. Several reported hearing arguments coming from her room late at night. Some believed she was trying to leave town in a hurry. Police have not ruled out foul play. I leaned back in my chair, heart thudding. Arguments? Distress? Why had no one ever mentioned this? And then I noticed the witness names listed at the bottom. One name stood out. Harold Ashby, retired, living in Bemidji. I drove to the listed address the next morning. A small cottage tucked away in the woods, a mailbox nearly swallowed by overgrown grass. A frail man in his 90s answered the door. His eyes were watery but alert. "I don't get visitors much anymore," he said, motioning me inside. I told him why I'd come, mentioned Eleanor, room 204. The article. He sat very still, then slowly nodded. "I remember her," he said. "Pretty girl, sad eyes, always looking over her shoulder." "Did you know Thomas Kelly?" "I did," he replied. "Quiet fellow, always polite, but something changed near the end. I think they were in love. Or maybe he thought they were. She was trying to leave. Said she was going to Chicago. Why didn't she? He hesitated. His hands trembled as he reached for a worn envelope in a drawer nearby. She gave me this, asked me to mail it the night she disappeared. I never did. I was young, scared. When the police started sniffing around, I thought it'd be best to stay out of it. He handed me the envelope. Yellowed with age, the seal still unbroken. Addressed to a Dr. Charles Feynman, 1411 W. Jackson Boulevard, Chicago, IL. Do you mind if I open it? I asked. He nodded. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, her handwriting delicate, slanted. Dr. Feynman, if you receive this, I've left Bemidji. I've decided not to go through with it. I know what you said, that I'd regret keeping the child, but I can't live with the guilt of giving her away. He doesn't know yet. I'm afraid. He's changed. Please don't contact me. Eleanor. My heart sank. She was pregnant. And Thomas didn't know. Or maybe he did. I thanked Mr. Ashby, returned to the hotel, and sat alone in room 204, holding Eleanor's letter like it was sacred. Her words painted a picture far more tragic than any ghost story. That night, I kept the lights off, recorder on, and the door to the closet slightly ajar. The old corridor behind the closet whispered now, like it was breathing. At 11:42 p.m., I felt it, a shift in pressure, a subtle electric tension in the air. The mirror fogged over again. Words formed slowly. You found the letter. I whispered, yes. Then a second line appeared. He begged me to stay. I rose from the bed, eyes locked on the mirror. Did he hurt you? No answer. The room fell still. And then a sound came from the corridor. A distant music box. A lullaby melody playing softly, like it had been trapped for decades and had finally found air. I stepped toward the closet, pushed open the hidden door, and walked through the tunnel again. This time I followed the music. At the end of the narrow corridor was the small service room I had discovered before. But now, it had changed. The walls were glowing faintly, as though lit by candlelight. I swear I saw shadows dancing. 2 figures. Eleanor and Thomas. They stood in the center of the room, transparent, trapped in a loop. She tried to leave. He begged. She shook her head. He grabbed her. She struggled. He cried. And then, silence. The figures froze. He looked horrified. She looked broken. And in the flicker of a blink, she was gone. And he was alone. The vision faded. The music box stopped. Back in room 204, the mirror now reflected something else. A crib. A small white crib, swaying gently, empty. I turned around. Nothing there. The mirror glitched again. Words appeared one final time. She never got to hold her. The next morning, I went back to the hotel archives. I needed more. Needed to know if there had ever been a child. A birth certificate. Anything. That's when I found it. Tucked between decades of ledgers and invoices. A certificate dated July 1952. Baby girl Stern. Stillborn. Mother Eleanor Stern. Signed by the attending physician. Location Lake Bemidji Medical Center. But Eleanor was never reported to have made it out of the hotel. That certificate shouldn't exist, unless she did leave. For a time. Maybe Thomas hadn't killed her. Maybe she left with him, had the baby, and died afterward. Or maybe the certificate was forged, faked, a cover-up. Too many questions, not enough answers. But one truth remained. Something terrible had happened here. Something soaked into the walls of room 204. And it wasn't just Eleanor who haunted the room. It was grief, loss, a future that never was. That night I returned one last time to room 204. I placed Eleanor's letter on the nightstand, laid a single white rose beside it. I whispered, "You can rest now." No fog on the mirror, no music box, no voices, only silence. And maybe, just maybe, peace. There's a moment in every story, true or not, when something changes inside the storyteller. When the tale stops being just a tale and becomes something heavier, more personal. That moment came for me the morning after I left Eleanor's letter and the white rose on the nightstand. I had expected something. Closure, perhaps. A ghostly thank you whispered through the air. But room 204 remained silent. Almost too silent. As if it had finally taken a deep breath after holding it for 70 years. I packed my bag that afternoon. My notes, photos, audio recordings, they all felt incomplete. Still, I knew I had to leave. I had come to Bemidji chasing a ghost, and instead, I had found a woman. A real woman, whose story was buried beneath shame, neglect, and decades of fear. As I checked out of the front desk, a new receptionist was on shift. Young, maybe 19. She barely looked up when she asked for my key card. "You were staying in 204, right?" she said, suddenly curious. "People say that room is haunted." I paused. "Do you believe it?" She laughed. "I don't know. I've never seen anything. But my grandma used to work here, long time ago. She said a woman vanished there. A long time back. Nobody ever found her." My hand stopped midair. "What was your grandmother's name?" "Ashby," she said. "Helen Ashby." The name struck like a chord in my chest. Harold Ashby, the man who'd given me Eleanor's unsent letter, had mentioned his wife was a housekeeper at the hotel in the 1950s. The story was connected, still alive, still being passed down, even if only in whispers. I gave a half smile, handed her the card, and walked out into the crisp Minnesota air. I should have felt relieved. But something gnawed at me. As the wind rustled through the trees and the lake shimmered in the distance, I realized the story wasn't over. Not yet. Not for me. That evening, against my better judgment, I returned. Room 204 had already been reassigned to another guest, but the hotel wasn't full. I rented the room across the hall, 205. Close enough. I didn't need to be in the room anymore. I just needed to see, to listen, to wait. At 11:41 p.m., it began. From behind the closed door of 204 came the faintest sound, a creak of old wood, followed by a low whisper. I stepped into the hallway, recorder in hand. My breath clouded the air even though the hall wasn't cold. Then, something stranger. A woman's voice humming. Soft. Fragile. I moved closer to the door. The hum grew louder. Familiar. Like a lullaby half remembered from childhood. The same lullaby I had heard from the music box behind the corridor. Suddenly, silence. The doorknob of room 204 turned. Slowly. As if something, or someone, was on the other side. And then it opened. Just a crack. Inside, the room was dark. But I saw her. Eleanor, or rather the shape of her, standing near the mirror, facing away from me. She was wearing the same dress as in the old newspaper photo. Her hair curled just so. I whispered, "Eleanor?" She didn't move. I stepped inside. The air was heavy, like walking into water. The door closed behind me with a dull click. And then she turned. Her face wasn't terrifying. Not monstrous, not grotesque, just sad, exhausted, tired of being remembered for how she vanished rather than how she lived. Her lips parted and she whispered, "He didn't mean to." Her voice was soft, like wind through a cracked window. I swallowed hard. "What happened?" Eleanor stepped toward the mirror, raised her hand, pointed to the reflection. In the glass, I didn't see myself. I saw Thomas Kelly on his knees, crying, rocking back and forth, alone in the hidden corridor. Eleanor was nowhere to be seen. He reached out, clawing at the stone walls as if trying to undo something he had done. Then, suddenly, the image faded. The mirror was now clear. Just me, and Eleanor beside me. She whispered again. He tried to help, but he was too late. I saw the death certificate, I said. Your baby, she didn't make it. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't blink. She never cried, never opened her eyes. I waited, but she didn't. My throat burned. And Thomas? He blamed himself, she said. He tried to bury everything, even me. You died in the corridor? Eleanor nodded. I stayed, because she never got to leave. A pause. Then, Eleanor stepped backward. Her figure began to fade, slowly becoming translucent. Thank you for listening, she said. You found me. The mirror fogged one last time. 3 final words. She is free. And with that, Eleanor was gone. Not in a flash, not with a scream, just gone, like a candle gently extinguished in the night. I collapsed on the bed, breathless. In the weeks that followed, I tried to make sense of it. I compiled everything, audio, documents, her letter, the old corridor's layout. I even published a short podcast episode about it. But I left out the ending. Some stories you don't share. Some are for the ghosts. 2 months later, I got an email from the new hotel manager. They decided to renovate the entire second floor. They found the old corridor behind room 204, walled off and forgotten. Inside, they discovered something strange. A rusted locket with initials ES and a small, folded note that read simply, I named her Lillian. I stared at that email for a long time. Room 204 still exists. You can stay there. But these days, it's quiet. No more foggy mirrors. No more lullabies. No more whispers in the dark. Eleanor is no longer waiting. She's free. And yet, every so often, at exactly 11:41 p.m., if you listen closely outside room 204, you might still hear the faint hum of a lullaby, and wonder, who is she singing to? There's something about an old hotel mirror that feels wrong, not because it's cracked or dusty, but because it's seen too much. I used to think reflections were harmless, just echoes of reality. But after the night I stood in front of the one in room 204, I've never looked at myself the same way again. It was just past 2:15 a.m. The storm that had started at dusk was now rattling the window panes with fierce, wind-driven rain. I had returned to the room alone. Daniel, my cameraman and skeptic-in-chief, had left to get the backup batteries from the car. He was taking longer than expected, but I wasn't worried. Not yet. The atmosphere in room 204 had shifted. The air had grown inexplicably cold. Not the kind of cold that seeps through walls during winter, but the biting, sterile cold you feel in a morgue. My breath fogged in the air, and every creak of the old building echoed louder than it should have. The mirror above the antique vanity called to me. There was nothing overt, no movement, no flicker, but I felt drawn, as if something behind the glass had its hand pressed silently against it, waiting. I approached slowly, flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The mirror was large and framed with dark wood etched in twisting, almost organic patterns. Up close, I could see it wasn't perfectly flat. There were slight warps in the glass, subtle imperfections that bent the light, just enough to make your reflection seem off. Not wrong, just not you. I stood in front of it and looked into my own eyes. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw her again. Not as a reflection, not standing behind me, but in me. Her face, layered over mine, the high cheekbones, the deep, searching eyes, that same wavy hair pinned back the way they wore it in the early 50s. It flickered like a double exposure. There, one moment, gone the next. I blinked hard. My rational brain told me it was exhaustion or maybe the warping of the glass playing tricks. But something deeper whispered, no, that was her. Suddenly, the mirror whined. It made a high-pitched, painful squeal, as if someone had dragged their fingernails down the surface from the other side. I stepped back, heart pounding, staring as my flashlight flickered, then died. For several seconds, I stood in darkness. The only sounds were the groaning of the old walls and the wind slamming against the windows. Then, very faintly, I heard it. A whisper, coming from the mirror. "Help me!" I froze. The voice was impossibly soft, as if it was buried under decades of silence. It was feminine, broken, full of longing. I leaned closer without meaning to, as if some subconscious instinct took control. "Who are you?" I asked, barely able to hear myself. The mirror fogged in a single breath, though I hadn't exhaled. Letters began to appear in the mist, slowly, as if written from the other side by a trembling hand. Edith. Then below it, Room 204. The name meant nothing to me yet, but the room, of course it was this room. The fog faded as quickly as it had appeared, and the glass was once again cold and smooth to the touch. I stumbled back, flashlight now barely flickering to life again. My phone's battery had drained inexplicably to 3%. The clock on the wall had stopped at 2:17 a.m., the exact moment I had heard her voice. Daniel burst in a minute later, soaked and irritated. I tried to tell him what happened, but he waved it off, said I was tired, stressed, probably hallucinating. "Get some sleep," he mumbled, flopping onto the creaky bed with a groan. But I couldn't sleep. Not after that. Not after seeing her. I sat up all night replaying the moment in my head, wondering what it meant. Who Edith was. Why she had chosen to appear to me. And above all, what she wanted. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed to dig deeper. If she was reaching out, if she had truly been trapped here since 1952, then I couldn't ignore her plea. Not anymore. It was still dark outside when I slipped out of room 204. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew and age-old wood polish, the kind that never quite masks the scent of time and secrets. Daniel was still asleep, snoring softly under the heavy hotel quilt, oblivious to the message I had seen on the mirror just hours ago. Edith. Room 204. It echoed in my mind like a heartbeat. I wasn't imagining it. I couldn't be. And I knew exactly where I had to go next. The hotel's basement wasn't on any guest map. I only found it by accident a day earlier when I spotted the janitor coming out of a narrow door behind the front desk. It looked like a broom closet, but when he left it slightly ajar, I caught a glimpse of concrete steps descending into darkness. That's where I headed. The old brass key I swiped from the unattended office earlier fit perfectly in the lock. With a soft click, the door swung open, releasing a blast of damp, heavy air that hadn't moved in decades. I stepped inside, phone light flickering in the pitch black. Every creak of the steps under my feet sounded like a warning. I counted 20 steps before the staircase ended in a cold, concrete room lit only by the halo of my phone's dying flashlight. It was filled with forgotten things. Dust-covered luggage, broken furniture, and boxes labeled with names and dates. That's when I saw it. A trunk. Old, wooden, iron-rimmed. It sat alone in the corner as if the room had grown around it. On the top, barely visible through the dust, was a name burned into the wood. E. Moreau. I crouched beside it. My breath fogged in the air. not from fear, but from cold. An unnatural cold. The kind of cold that clings to things buried and bound. I opened the trunk slowly. Inside was a woman's dress, 1950s style, seafoam green, delicate lace around the collar. Beneath it, a pair of dance shoes worn at the heels, and a small jewelry box containing a faded locket. I opened it. Inside was a photo of a man and woman, smiling. Her smile was familiar. It was her, Edith. Under the jewelry box was a yellowed envelope. On the outside it simply read, "To whom it may concern." I opened it. December 21st, 1952. If you're reading this, then perhaps you already know. My name is Edith Moreau. I was a singer here at the Lakeview Hotel for nearly 7 years. I performed in the lounge every Friday and Saturday night wearing my green dress and my lucky dance shoes. Guests said I had a voice like honey, but no one really listened. Not truly. Except him, Arthur Delaney, the hotel's owner. He was charming in public, generous to guests, always with a cigarette and a story. But behind closed doors, he was something else, something darker. He said he loved me, that he'd leave his wife, that we'd run away. But I knew too much. I saw things, heard things, guests who disappeared, employees who left without a word. And one night I told him I couldn't keep his secrets anymore. Though that was the night I disappeared. He lured me to room 204, said we'd talk it over. He brought me champagne, like always. But there was something bitter in the taste. I remember feeling dizzy. Then pain. Then the floor. I woke up only once more. In the basement. On the cold floor. His face above mine. And then darkness. If my story reaches you, please tell someone. Let the truth be known. I don't want to keep reliving that night. I just want to be free. Edith Moreau. The letter trembled in my hands. I was shaking. Not from fear, but rage. Grief. That such a story had been buried beneath years of renovations, behind polite smiles and carefully curated hotel brochures. Edith had been silenced. Hidden. And now she was crying out through glass and shadow and whispers in the night. I returned to room 204, letter in hand. Daniel was awake, groggy, confused. I handed him the paper without a word. As he read, his expression shifted from disbelief to horror. I think we need to go to the police, he finally said. No, I replied. We need to show everyone. We're journalists. If we walk away now, her voice gets buried again. He nodded slowly. We packed up our equipment, reviewed the footage. Some of it was corrupted. Some had strange interference, but the mirror scene, the whisper, the name written in fog, it had all been captured. The audio was distorted but clear enough to send chills down the spine. We uploaded the video that night. A raw, unpolished account. Not for clicks, not for fame. For her. The response was immediate. Comments flooded in, some skeptical, others sharing their own eerie experiences in room 204 over the years. One commenter, an elderly woman, claimed her sister worked at the hotel in the early 1950s and vanished without explanation. Her sister's name was Edith. Another former staff member remembered whispers about a singer who ran away with a guest. But no records were ever found. Until now. A week later, local authorities reopened a cold case from 1952. Ground-penetrating radar was brought into the basement of the Lakeview Hotel. Beneath a warped section of floorboards, human remains were found, wrapped in silk, wearing a green dress. Dental records confirmed it. Edith Moreau had been found. And finally, she could rest. Even after Edith was found, the Lakeview Hotel didn't shut down. It should have, but the owners, different people now, decades removed from Arthur Delaney and his legacy, insisted the hotel had moved on. That was another lifetime, the new manager said to the press, trying to smile into cameras while police wheeled a coffin past the lobby's grand piano. Daniel and I stayed in town, though we moved to a small rental on the outskirts, away from the lake. I couldn't bring myself to go near the water again, not after what we saw, not after hearing her voice through static, crying from beneath the floor. Edith's story had gone viral. National news picked it up. Talk shows debated the ethics of haunted places and digital journalism. We didn't want the fame. We wanted the truth. Still, thousands watched our video each day. Comments poured in, some skeptical, but many others sharing eerily similar tales. A woman from Ohio said she visited the Lakeview in 1983 and refused to sleep in room 204 because, according to her, the mirror watched her. Another man claimed he had worked maintenance at the hotel in the 70s and once found water pooling on the bathroom floor of 204, except no one had stayed in the room for weeks. The internet became a confessional booth, and Edith somehow had become a name that people whispered again. Her voice was no longer buried beneath concrete and dust. But the strangest thing was this: the hauntings didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder. 2 weeks after the discovery of her remains, the hotel reopened room 204. That's when the phone calls started. A front desk worker named Carmen reached out to us directly. Her email was shaky, full of typos and half-finished thoughts. She begged us to come back. So we did. I didn't want to. But Daniel said if we didn't document it, someone else would. Probably someone who wouldn't care about Edith's dignity, who would turn her pain into clickbait or a TikTok trend. I agreed. But the second I stepped into the lobby again, my breath caught in my throat. The chandelier, the piano, the scent of old wood, all of it was unchanged. Carmen met us outside room 204, trembling. Her name tag was crooked and she gripped a rosary tightly in her hand. She told us what happened. 3 nights ago, she said, voice thin, a couple checked in. Newlyweds. They wanted something spooky, asked for 204 by name, said they saw your video. She swallowed. By morning, she was gone. The wife just vanished. Room locked from the inside. Husband swears he never heard her leave. They searched the entire building. Nothing. No footage, no prints. And the husband? I asked. Won't speak. At all. Daniel and I exchanged a glance. Something deeper was stirring. We entered the room again. The walls had been repainted, the linens changed. They even added new curtains. But the bones of the place were the same. The mirror was still there. Clean. Too clean. As if it had been scrubbed raw. Daniel set up our camera while I approached the mirror. My fingers hovered just above the glass. I don't think she wanted this, I whispered. She wanted justice. She got it. Why is she still here? The room grew cold. Not a breeze, just a sudden drop in temperature that raised goosebumps on my arms. Then came the noise. Tap, tap, tap. Not on the door, on the mirror, from the inside. I stepped back. The glass fogged slightly just for a second. And in it, I swore I saw a face. Not Edith's. Younger, eyes wide, mouth open as if gasping for help or screaming. And then it was gone. Daniel reviewed the footage. We had it. Again. No one would believe us. But it was there. A figure. A whisper. She's not alone, I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. Daniel looked at me. What do you mean? This isn't just about Edith. She wasn't the only one. Think about what she wrote. I saw things, heard things, guests who disappeared. What if the hotel itself is a grave? He didn't answer. I stood and moved to the closet. It was empty, of course, but when I knocked on the back panel, something echoed hollow. Daniel and I didn't speak. We just started searching. Behind the panel was a crawl space, narrow, dusty, and unlit. It stretched behind the wall toward the neighboring room, and maybe farther. We squeezed inside, holding our breath, until we found what we feared. Scratches. Not on the floor or ceiling, but on the walls, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. "Help me," Daniel whispered, reading aloud what was faintly etched into the wood. "Help me," over and over again. We crawled back out, silent. It wasn't over. That night I dreamed of the lake. I saw Edith in her green dress, standing barefoot on the frozen shore. She was looking out over the black ice, where dozens of shadows moved beneath the surface, skating in slow, endless circles. She turned to me and said one word. "Listen." I awoke to the sound of the hotel's lobby music, the kind they play on repeat through ceiling speakers, but beneath it, a voice, a woman, singing, soft, mournful, familiar, the same song from the phonograph, the one in the trunk. We grabbed our gear and ran, down to the basement, through the narrow halls, past the old luggage and broken chairs, back to the place where they found her. The trunk was gone. In its place, a circle of salt, and a single photograph. Edith, with Arthur, and another woman. We didn't recognize her, but she wore the same dress Edith had been found in, and on the back of the photo, scrawled in red, "She lied. I died." What had we done? Edith wasn't the only one silenced. She may have gotten her justice, but someone else was still screaming. Another soul, bound to this cursed place, maybe more. And now that we'd cracked the mirror, so to speak, the others were waking up. We packed our things. We left, and we promised each other we wouldn't come back. But I still hear the tapping. When I close my eyes, when I look into mirrors. It's faint. Almost nothing. Tap, tap, tap. And I wonder who else died in room 204? And what if they're waiting for me? I left Bemidji 2 months after that final visit. At least, I told myself it was final. Daniel stayed a little longer, said he needed more time to sort through footage, files, and unanswered questions. I didn't argue. I couldn't. Not when every time I closed my eyes I saw her face pressed against the mirror. Not Edith's, but the other one. The woman who never had a name. The one we'd ignored in our pursuit of Edith's story. Because Edith had a diary. Edith had a photograph. Edith had a voice. The others? They had silence. I moved back east, closer to my sister's family. Thought that would help. Noise, warmth, children laughing in rooms with sunlight. But even surrounded by life, I kept looking over my shoulder. Not in fear, in guilt. I didn't know who she was, but she had died alone. Hidden behind someone else's legend. A ghost inside a ghost story. That's when the dreams returned. It started the same way every time. I'm standing in the hallway of the Lakeview Hotel. The wallpaper is peeling. Lights flicker overhead. Room 204's door is slightly ajar, but no matter how far I walk, I never reach it. Because the hallway stretches longer and longer the closer I get, until I hear it. The sound of ice skates, gliding, scratching, and someone weeping just beneath my feet. Every night. Daniel finally called one morning. His voice was different, measured, hollow. "You need to come back," he said. "No," I replied instinctively, but he insisted. He'd found something. Something we missed. I arrived in Bemidji 3 days later, snow covering the town like a shroud. The Lakeview still stood, lights dimmed, business quiet. A sign out front said renovations in progress, but we knew better. No one was fixing anything. They were just trying to keep people out. Daniel met me outside with 2 cups of coffee and a box of folders under his arm. I went through all of it, he said. Police reports, hotel records, newspaper clippings. You won't believe how many women have disappeared from this place. How many? I asked. He didn't answer with a number. He handed me a sheet instead. Names. Dozens of them, most labeled unsolved. Others had no record of even being searched for. I cross-referenced every guest who ever went missing here. Room 204, 206, even 217. There's a pattern. Every decade, 1 or 2 disappearances. Quiet, forgotten. He pulled out an old black-and-white photograph. It was the same one we'd found in the basement. Edith, Arthur, and the unnamed woman. I found her name, Daniel said. It's Margaret Keller. He passed me another paper, an obituary, dated 1953. Margaret Ann Keller, presumed deceased. Last seen at Lakeview Hotel, Bemidji, MN. Missing since June 1952. No remains recovered. Edith had vanished that same month. They buried her story, Daniel muttered. They buried her, just like they buried Edith. But Margaret never got found. Never got a piece. We didn't speak for a while. Then Daniel leaned in. I think she's still there. I stared at him. We already knew that. No, he said. I mean, I think she's the one still active, the one tapping. Why? He pulled out one final item, a guest book, dated 1987. There, written in shaky ink under the check-in list, was a message. Please help her. She's in the mirror. She's not Edith. No one had ever mentioned that entry before. No manager, no staff, no police report. But it had been there, buried between the pages. I scanned this book at the local historical society, Daniel said. Guess where the guest was staying? 204, I whispered. He nodded. That night we snuck back into the hotel. It wasn't hard. No one wanted to guard a place like that anymore. Everything inside was exactly as we'd left it. The lobby still smelled like faded wood polish and damp carpet. Upstairs, the hallway buzzed with dim lights. Room 204 was sealed, padlocked, chained. But the chain was rusted, like no one had touched it in years. Daniel pulled the bolt cutters from his coat. You ready? No, I replied. But open it anyway. The door creaked like it remembered us. The air inside was stale, bitter. The mirror stood untouched. No fog, no face. Not yet. We set up the equipment again. Voice recorders, EMF readers, a static mic near the mirror. Then we waited. Midnight passed. The hotel was still. Then, from the hallway, faint footsteps. Slow, dragging. Ice scraping on tile. But no one appeared. Instead, the mirror began to fog. And then we heard it. Not Edith. The voice came through the static, barely a whisper, then clearer. Margaret. My heart stopped. The mirror began to shift. Not crack, ripple, as if it were water. A shape formed. Not a woman this time. A child. Small, eyes wide, holding a hand out toward us. Help her, the child said. And just as suddenly the image vanished. Daniel and I stared at each other, breathless. We didn't speak. Not then. In the following days, we worked in silence, compiling the stories, the names, the dates. We traced Margaret's history, her job, her life, her trip to the hotel with her fiancé. We discovered she'd argued with Arthur Delaney 2 nights before her disappearance. No one had followed up. No body had been found. Until we listened. Until she told us her name. We posted a new video, but not like the others. No sensational music, no shock cuts. Just her story. Margaret Keller, the forgotten spirit of room 204. We ended the video with a message. Sometimes justice doesn't come from headlines. Sometimes it comes from listening to the voices we silenced. People watched, and surprisingly, they cared. Messages poured in. Someone claimed to be Margaret's niece. She'd been born years after the disappearance, but had always been told Aunt Maggie just ran away. She cried when she saw the mirror. The family came. They held a memorial outside the hotel, laid lilies on the frozen lake. And that night, for the first time, room 204 was quiet. No tapping, no singing, just silence. I haven't gone back, but Daniel did. One last time. He said he just wanted to make sure. He called me from the parking lot just before going in. "Do you think it's over?" he asked. "No," I said honestly, "but I think she's free." And that's all we could hope for. Because ghosts don't haunt walls. They haunt memory. They stay until we remember them. Not as monsters, but as people. Margaret Keller didn't vanish. She was taken, forgotten. But now, at last, she's been found. And maybe, just maybe, room 204 can finally rest. It's been a year now. 12 months since Daniel and I stepped out of that hallway for the last time, since the air in room 204 stopped humming, and the mirror, once a window to grief, became nothing more than glass. Or so we thought. I moved on, or tried to. I no longer chase ghosts in abandoned buildings or dig through century-old police records late at night. I drink my coffee in silence now. I water the same plant every morning. I let the quiet be what it is. Not an omen, but a kindness. But Daniel never stopped. He still works with the archive. Still walks through forgotten towns and empty homes, asking the questions no one wants to hear. Who was she? What happened here? Who's still waiting to be remembered? And sometimes he sends me photos. A window, cracked, slightly open. A shoe left behind in a hallway. A hotel ledger with one name scratched out. He never says much, but I know what he's telling me. The dead still whisper, and the living still forget. Except, perhaps, for room 204. Last month, the Lakeview Hotel was finally sold. A development group from Minneapolis purchased the property. Rumors say they plan to turn it into a boutique heritage site, lean into its haunted reputation for tourism. They even reached out to us. "Would you be willing," they asked, "to come speak at the grand reopening, share the story?" We declined. There are things you don't sell. There are voices you don't package into Halloween tours. There are stories you tell gently, or not at all. But something about the invitation gnawed at me. A restlessness in the back of my chest. I found myself pulling out the old files. Not Edith's diary, not the photographs, but the guest registry from 1987. The one with the plea scrawled in shaky pen. "Please help her. She's in the mirror. She's not Edith." And it hit me. Someone had seen her. Decades ago. Someone tried to tell the truth long before we arrived. Someone remembered Margaret Keller when no one else did. I don't know who wrote that note, but I owe them everything, because they planted the seed. And even if no one listened then, we did. And sometimes that's all it takes. I visited Margaret's grave yesterday. It's modest. A small, marble headstone tucked beneath a row of birch trees on the edge of a cemetery not far from the lake. Her family buried her with a proper marker after we helped them verify the details. Official closure, even if her body was never found. Just her name. Her story. That was enough. The headstone reads, "Margaret Ann Keller, and 29, 1952, she never truly left." I stood there for a long while. The wind brushed through the trees like a breath. A few crows cawed in the distance. The lake glimmered faintly beyond the tree line. I don't know why I was waiting. Maybe part of me thought she'd show up. One last time. Just to say goodbye. But the air stayed still. And maybe that's a gift. Not every haunting ends with an exorcism or a scream in the dark. Some end with peace, with stillness, with the quiet weight of grief finally lifted. As I turned to leave, I noticed something on the edge of the stone. A single white lily. Fresh. I hadn't brought it. Neither had Margaret's family. I'd spoken to them the day before. I picked it up. There was no note, no name. Just a flower. A symbol. Someone else remembered her too. Maybe the guest from 1987. Maybe a hotel staffer who saw her once and never spoke of it. Or maybe Daniel, quietly paying his respects. Either way, she wasn't forgotten. Not anymore. In the months since we released her story, people have started reaching out. Emails, letters, comments, some kind, some skeptical, but a surprising number of them shared something else. Their own room 204s. My grandmother disappeared in a boarding house in 1946. There was a girl who cried in our attic. We used to think it was the pipes. We had a mirror in the hallway, and sometimes someone else looked back. Their stories are quiet, small, but every one of them is a haunting in its own right. Not always ghostly, but always filled with what we left behind. Because that's the truth about haunted places. They're not cursed by evil, they're heavy with memory. And if you listen closely, if you stand very still, you'll hear it. Not a scream, not a wail, just the faintest whisper, "Please remember me." We titled the final video, "The Forgotten Ghost of Room 204. No jump scares, no theatrics, just a girl, a name, a voice pulled from silence. It was the most watched video we ever posted, and the most quiet. We never posted a follow-up. We never had to. Because Margaret's story wasn't about closure. It was about recognition, about seeing the invisible, about letting someone lost in the mirror finally walk away. And so we ended the series with just 4 words. She was never alone. Because now, at last, she isn't. And room 204? It still exists. But it doesn't call out at night anymore. It simply waits. Quiet. At all, peace.